Crusading was one of medieval Europe's favourite pastimes. It wouldn't take much for a pope to issue a call to crusade, and soon kings, princes and lords would be marching an army to either retake the Holy Land or generally just make life difficult for the Islamic powers on the other side of the Mediterranean. Yet, as you'll know, one day the crusades stopped. But why? Why did the era of crusading come to an end? Now, when most people discuss crusading, it's often in reference to those in the Middle East. But it's important to remember that there were several against pagans in Northern and Eastern Europe. Furthermore, there were those in the Iberian Peninsula and also ones which were directed against the heretical movements throughout Europe in the 13th, 14th and 15th centuries. Those in the Iberian Peninsula stopped because simply the Christians won and all of the Muslim states there were extinguished by 1492. For the Crusades in the Middle East, those came to an end in the late 13th century for several more complicated reasons. The first was that the Crusaders kept losing, and you can only keep trying the same thing so many times before it just seems silly. Another reason was that the primary region of the Crusades had now moved to North Africa, and much of their focus was on trade and piracy. They were now much smaller in scale and were primarily done in a kingdom's interest, not for religious zeal. Furthermore, many were now undertaken without the consent of the Pope, which leads into one of the main reasons that these formal crusades came to an end. The papacy's power began to decline and everyone started to ignore them. This was due to several factors. First, there were numerous schisms and as such, numerous popes who had different rulers acknowledge them. This meant that crusading became much more risky, since previously going on a crusade meant that the Pope would excommunicate anyone who invaded you during that time. And if you rejected the Pope who sanctioned the crusade, you could just wait until your rival's army left for the Holy Land and in you went. The second reason for the papacy's decline was the Protestant Reformation, which meant that many places were now permanently out of the Pope's sphere of influence, and many of those who remained were now dealing with internal religious conflict. So did this mean the end of formal crusading? Well, kind of, but also no. There were still large wars involving numerous Christian states which occurred under the direction of the Pope. Although not via papal bulls, most of those issued around this time were ignored. The most notable of these religious wars were those of the Holy League against the Ottoman Empire. These weren't to restore the Holy Land or reconquer Constantinople, but to slow and ultimately halt the Ottoman expansion in the Mediterranean and Europe. This didn't work immediately, but it wasn't long until the Ottoman Empire began its long terminal decline, and European nations soon operated in terms of independent national foreign policy, and not with any sense of a united Christian world trying to reclaim important religious cities. It was national self-interest which would direct foreign wars after this, and that continued all the way to the capture of Jerusalem by the British in World War I, who were very quick to dismiss any religious undertones to the conquest because by then the idea of a Christian religious war was completely bizarre. I hope you enjoyed this episode and thank you for watching.